Right, Shavua Tov, everyone. I want to make two dedications today for this shiur. One is for Faye's mother's yortzeit. She's not yet with us because she's not arrived yet, but nevertheless, Faye's mother, Miriam Bat Shaya Tzvi, has her yortzeit today. So we wish Faye Chaim Arukim, and we'll dedicate this shiur to her memory. And also, I want to dedicate this shiur to the memory of the father of a friend of mine who passed away yesterday, who I strongly suspect is a contemporary of Leon's. Harold Bishop passed away yesterday. Tzvi ben Avraham, his son Avram Bishop, who's obviously named after his grandfather, is my closest friend in Manchester. Harold Bishop, for those that knew him, was a larger-than-life character. He was a small man with an enormous personality, whose Jewish values and Jewish soul shone out. He was a stalwart of Childwell Shul. Am I right, Leon? He was
correct. He was also a client of mine.
Oh, okay, there you are. And he was a larger-than-life character who, when he came into the room, his presence filled the room. He was a lovely man. I remember him very fondly whenever he was visiting Manchester and visiting his son, who's a friend of mine. So he passed away yesterday, and we will dedicate this shiur Le'ilyu Nishmato Tzvi ben Avraham. Okay, it's not the greatest subject to have dedicated to you, to tell you the truth, but nevertheless, hopefully we'll get something out of it, which will be of benefit to the souls of the departed. We are holding in chapter 19, verse 25 of Shoftim. For those of you who need a reminder, this is the story of the rape of the concubine at Giveah, the beginning of the story, which turns out to be even worse than it starts off, if that's possible. We spoke last week about the very clear parallels between this story and the story of Lot and the angels, and the fact that the men of Sodom wanted to rape the guests of Lot, and Lot offered them his daughters. Here we have the men of Giveah, who want to rape our Levite, and the old man who's taken him in offers his own daughter and the concubine. So let's just go from verse 24, Leon, and we'll pick up the story here.
Here are my virgin daughter and his concubine. I will bring them out, and you may molest them and do to them whatever you please, but do not do this disgusting thing to this man. But the men were not willing to listen to him. The man grabbed his concubine and thrust her outside to them. They knew her and they molested her all night long. Excuse me. Until the morning. They sent her away as the dawn began to break. The woman arrived towards morning and collapsed at the door of the man's house, where her master was staying until it was light. Her master got up in the morning, opened the doors of the house and left to go on his way. And behold, his concubine wife was fallen at the entrance of the house, with her hands on the threshold. He said to her, "Get up, let us go." But there was no answer. He took her upon the donkey, and then the man got up and went to his place.
Okay, let's stop there. So this is the sorry tale, and we don't learn, do we? I'm sure you've been following the events of what has gone on in Eilat in the last few days. It could have been lifted right from this chapter. It's for those of you that don't know, there was a case of gang rape in Eilat. A young girl was allegedly gang raped by a large number of men in Eilat.
16 years old.
16 years old, that's right. Following which there were demonstrations. I don't know what they were demonstrating against, but they were demonstrating against something. A terrible story, a terrible story.
And I just butt in, they were demonstrating because there were Israelis who committed a rape in Cyprus who got off scot-free and came back as heroes. And they were saying that this is one of the things that could have prevented what happened in Eilat.
Okay, I don't want to get into the ins and outs of that because the story in Cyprus was rather complicated by the fact that the girl withdrew her complaint, etc., etc. Either way, a situation where one can be accused of rape, gang rape, in Cyprus, whether it happened or it didn't happen, we don't know. And the situation in Eilat, it's shocking. It's shocking that we here. Well, anywhere, of course, but you know, we're here, aren't we? And we would like to think that we're above this. But look at this story that we're learning now. We haven't learned our lessons, have we? That's very, very clear. Let's go into our story and let's look at it in some detail as we normally do. What's interesting is, let's just go back. Here, let's just go back to verse 24. He offers his own daughter and the concubine, and they didn't want to listen to him. But then in verse 25, he actually shoves the concubine out the door, and that seems to satisfy their requirements, even though it says in the beginning of the pasuk they did not want to listen to him. And it's very interesting because I want to show you in some detail a Ramban, Nachmanides. I want to show you a Ramban, which is, well, I want to hear what you think of this Ramban before I tell you what I think of the Ramban on this particular issue. The Ramban is, well, let's see who the Ramban was. The Ramban Nachmanides lived in the 12th century in Spain, and he was a commentator of great renown, highly revered. Is not frightened. The Ramban is not frightened to say it as it is. Often is critical of characters about whom we're not meant to be critical, according to some. So the Ramban has things to say. Let's have a look at the Ramban. The Ramban is not speaking specifically. The Ramban's commentary is not on this particular chapter, but is on the chapter, Bereshit chapter 19, which is the story of Lot, which is so clearly paralleled to our story. You'll remember that in the last couple of weeks, we've pointed out not only the similarities in the actual events, but we've pointed out several similarities in the language that is used in Sefer Shoftim. The same words which are used in Sefer Shoftim as used in chapter 19 of Bereshit. So there's clearly a very strong parallel. The Ramban actually picks up on this and speaks about the differences between the Lot story and our story. And let's have a look at it. I'm going to share the screen with you. This is the English translation of the Ramban on Bereshit chapter 19. So let me share the screen. Okay, can you see the screen? Yeah? Can you see my Ramban there? Okay. It might be a little bit small, so I'll tell you what it says. So here, the Ramban is commenting on the Bereshit chapter 19, which I will just pull up here. Chapter 19. There we go. Right. So here is the story of Lot and the angels. They called to Lot and they said to him, "Where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out to us and let us be intimate with them." And Lot came out to them and shut the door behind them. And he said, "Don't do this. I have 2 daughters who were not intimate with a man, virgin daughters, same as our story. I'll bring them out to you and do them as you see fit. Only to these men, do nothing, because they have come under the shadow of my roof." So that is what Lot said, and this is what our pasuk says. Don't do those things, but to this man do not do this graceful act. I'll give you my virgin daughter, etc. So there's very strong parallels. Now let's have a look at the Ramban. The Ramban says this. You should know and understand regarding the episode of the concubine in Giveah, though it's similar to our episode, is not comparable to it in its evil. So the Ramban is saying straight away that he thinks that what's gone on here in Giveah, in our story, is not as bad as what went on in Sodom. So in other words, he's saying, yes, we can see the parallels, and clearly the Navi is pointing us back to the Sodom story, but the Ramban is saying it wasn't as bad. And let's have a look why he says that. Because it wasn't the intention of those wicked ones of Giveah to get rid of wayfarers from their place. Rather, they were steeped in promiscuity to the extent that they desired to have relations even with the man who was a guest. Okay, so he's saying there's a fundamental difference here. The story of Giveah was a story of pure lust. This was sexual promiscuity, sexual immorality on a high level. He's not saying that's great, but he's saying it's not as bad as institutional cruelty, which was the hallmark of Sodom. Sodom had a policy of being cruel and torturing, including rape, obviously, any kind of visitors, for the reasons that we spoke about a couple of weeks ago. Sodom was a very affluent place, and it didn't want to share its largesse with any immigrants, whether they be refugees from across the channel or any other kind of immigrants. They specifically had a policy of turning away immigrants and not sharing what they had with them, to the extent that it was institutional cruelty. And we spoke about the midrashim that we all heard about when we were in kindergarten, about putting people on the rack and chopping their legs off and tarring and feathering them and all that kind of stuff. And the Ramban is saying that that was an institutional problem. And that he points out, he goes on to point out that the people in Sodom, it says all the townspeople. Let's see if we can find that. Where it says they came around. Where is it? Here we go. Verse 4 there. Leon, verse 4 chapter 19 of Bereshit.
When they had not yet retired, and the people of the city, the people of Sodom, surrounded the house, both young and old, the entire populace from every end of the city.
So Sodom, every single one of them were there. In our story, let's have a look who it was. There we go, verse 22.
As they were feeling merry, behold, people of the city, lawless people, surrounded the house, banging on the door,
Okay,
and saying to the old man.
So these were Anshe B'nai Belial. These were the lawless people. And the Ramban points out, let's go back to the Ramban. He said, first of all, there was not institutional wickedness. He says, the old man, where are we? Okay. When they brought out his concubine out to them, they were appeased with her. So that seems, according to the Ramban, to be a good thing. That in the Sodom story, they weren't satisfied with Lot's daughters. They continued to bang the door down and demand the men. Whereas in the Shoftim story, the Ramban points out that when the concubine is thrust out the door, that seems to do for them. They don't then continue to demand the men. And the Ramban seems to put that on a lower level. He goes further and he says the following: the old man, the host, who said to them, "Here are my virgin daughter and concubine. Let me bring them out and you may do them whatever you want." He knew that they wouldn't desire his daughter and would not do anything wrong to her, and they therefore refused to listen to him. But when he sent his guest's concubine by herself, they stopped demanding his guest from him. Now the man who was the master of the house and the guest, both of them desired to save the man by giving the concubine instead. For she was a concubine, not a married woman, and was unfaithful to him. So here, the Ramban is very clearly disparaging about this woman. She is, inverted commas, only a concubine, a mere concubine, not a married woman. And the Ramban clearly interprets that word that we had a discussion about, vatizne, from the word zanut, as that she was unfaithful. We, I think, most of us at least, decided that that word did not mean that she was unfaithful, because if she was unfaithful, why would the guy go back looking for her, etc.? We had that discussion a couple of weeks ago. The Ramban doesn't agree with us. The Ramban here says clearly that she was unfaithful. And I don't know about you, but I detect in the Ramban's words here a little bit of, well, you know, she sort of deserved it because she was only a concubine after all, and she was unfaithful after all. And I'm a little uncomfortable with that. I was meant to get your views on that, but I couldn't help it. Sorry. Okay, so that's what he says.
I'm very uncomfortable with that. I am very uncomfortable with that, Johnny. that is so misogynistic. That is so, that I'm very, I told you before, I hate this story. It is one of the worst stories in the Bible, but that whole issue of the fact that she's like disposable and that they could, you know, rape her and gang rape her and whatever, it is just despicable. And then he's kind of putting the onus on her, saying that word zonah that we decided did not mean that she was unfaithful, and that we kind of proved by the text that she wasn't unfaithful. And now he's saying, well, because she's that, it's fine for them to like do that to her. No.
Okay, so I happen to agree with Faye. Is there anybody that reads that Ramban differently to me? Is there anybody that reads that Ramban differently? Is there anybody that would like to comment on that Ramban at this particular point?
Johnny.
Yes, David.
First of all, I think you need to read a lot further into this Ramban, where he compares the Averot of Sodom and Amorah with Pelegish Giveah, and he's not trying.
David, you're spoiling it. We have to go slowly. We go.
Sorry, I thought that's where you were stopping it. Okay,
no, we're carrying on. We're carrying on.
Okay, good.
Yes, Hillary. We can't hear you, Hillary, for some reason. No, I think you're not connected for some reason, Hillary. You're not muted, but we can't hear you. So you'll have to do something with your computer. All right, let's
comment.
Yes, Morris.
It seems to me this old man, he's willing to sacrifice his virgin daughter instead of his guest, even though the guest was a man. The idea of hospitality, I realize, is very strong, and also the idea of sexual relations with a man is even in those days was considered a high abomination. But the fact that he's willing to give these people his virgin daughter, it doesn't seem very on his part, this guy, very apropos, as one might say.
This is very interesting, because what Rav Steinsaltz points out in his commentary is something very interesting. He points out the perversity, really, of that logic. Remember, there's precedent here. The precedent is in the story of Lot, of course, because Lot offers his 2 virgin daughters to the baying crowd. Now, what Rav Steinsaltz points out, let me just read it to you, because he says it quite interestingly. He says, by handing over his concubine, the man certainly did not act heroically. His response was spineless, cowardly, and selfish. However, it is possible that another man would have reacted in the same manner. The men of the city did not ask for a ransom, but for his body, and the elderly man and his Levite guests could think of no other way to protect him. In many places, rape was commonly perpetrated against women, but totally unaccepted when perpetrated against men. Therefore, when presented with a choice, the priority was to prevent the rape of a man. Lot made the same choice in a similar situation. And before you jump on Rav Steinsaltz, he then puts in brackets, because that's where he's quoting from, he then puts in brackets, see the Ramban on that parasha, which is what we're doing right now. So,
Johnny, can you hear me?
Now we can hear you, yes, Hillary.
Just one very quick thing, and Faye, don't hate me. As much as it's a heinous deed, is it not a case again of giving up one to save more important or many? In that respect,
I think that's an important point to raise. Number one, is it a case of giving up somebody who is to save somebody more important? I put more important in inverted commas. In their eyes, absolutely yes. It's very clear that in their eyes, giving up this woman was preferable to giving up this man. I am very uncomfortable with that, and I think that the halacha is also uncomfortable with that. We will, when we start our medical ethics course after the Chagim, one of the things that we're going to deal with in detail is the allocation of resources, and whether it is permitted to give resources out on the basis of importance, which of course is very subjective and not objective. In terms of numbers, well, I don't think that really holds water here, Hillary, because they were willing to give 2 people, which was the virgin daughter and the concubine, and what they people were demanding was the man, which is
But
what
as you say, the man knew they wouldn't want his daughter, and her life ends up not being totally in vain. So.
Okay, so I didn't say that they didn't want his daughter. The Ramban said that. And I am interested that you've picked up on that, Hilary, because I'm interested to know why the Ramban says that. He says here, if those of you have got the page, can you still see my page? Yeah? Okay, where my pointer is, the old man, the host, said to them, "Here are my virgin daughter and concubine. Let me bring them out, and you may do what them to whoever you want." He knew that they wouldn't desire his daughter and not do anything wrong to her, and they therefore refused to listen to him. I don't know, can anybody see how the Ramban arrives at that? I'm struggling to see how the Ramban knows that they wouldn't want his virgin daughter. I suppose the only thing you can say, and I hadn't actually noticed this until the Ramban pointed it out, if we go back to the Psukim, they offer, "Here's my virgin daughter." They didn't want to listen to him, verse 25. So he grabbed the concubine and shoved them outside, and they were intimate with her. Now,
maybe the daughter was very young, Johnny. Maybe the daughter was very, very young and they didn't want her.
Maybe, but where does the, I think it's a big leap from there for the Ramban to say that the old man knew that they wouldn't want the daughter. To me, I read that. I mean, I'm certainly open to other people's views. I read this pasuk to say that they grabbed the concubine, shoved her outside, and the men thought, well, we're not going to get the guy, so we might as well make do with this. And off they went. So, I don't know. I think the Ramban's got a huge leap from these.
But the young virgin daughter is still of some value. The fact that she's still pure. Whereas the concubine, they would think, well, she's had her time. She's chosen her lifestyle. It won't matter to her.
That, I think, is what the Ramban is saying. And that's what I'm uncomfortable with. So let's carry on in the Ramban.
She's a 25-year-old, Hilary. What if she's a 25-year-old beauty and the daughter is a 3-year-old toddler?
Could be.
Get real.
Johnny,
Okay, first of all, David, and then Nechama. Yes, David.
Yeah, the suggestion I've seen here is that they weren't interested in her. They were more interested in the strangers because she was a local girl. They didn't want to do any harm to her.
But that flies in the face of what the Ramban is saying earlier on, because the Ramban is saying earlier on, over here, he says, you should know and understand regarding the episode of the concubine in Giveah, though it's similar to our episode, it's not comparable, because it wasn't the intention of those wicked ones of Giveah to get rid of wayfarers. Rather, they were steeped in promiscuity. Whereas in Sodom,
and the promiscuity that they were steeped in was homosexual.
No.
Okay, so that's one thing, but it doesn't really fit, David, because if it's only homosexuality they're interested in, then they wouldn't have been interested in the concubine. Your point, the question I'm asking is, how did he know they wouldn't want his virgin daughter? And your answer was because they were interested in strangers and not the local girl. I don't think that fits with what the Ramban says. The Ramban is saying that this was not an anti-stranger thing the way it was in Sodom. He's specifically saying it wasn't an anti-immigrant thing. It was just pure lust. So I'm struggling with that particular part of the Ramban. And Nechama, you wanted to say something.
On verse 19, it says that, he describes that he has food for his donkeys and bread and wine and his concubine and also a lad who is with him. So why didn't he offer the lad rather than give the concubine that he was going after her, wanted her back, and now he's throwing her out, knowing that she can be also finished up for so many people? He had a lad there.
Okay, that's a very good question. It's a very good question. He had a lad, and they clearly wanted a man, didn't they? As David has said, the promiscuity here seems to be of a homosexual nature. He could have offered the lad, and he didn't. That's an interesting point, Nechama.
It just shows his attitude and relationship with the concubine.
Okay, I think that's true. I think that
is less valuable to him than.
Okay, I think that's absolutely right. Before I come to Howard on his point, anybody got anything to say about Nechama's point? I think that's a very good point. I think that the Psukim do actually support that very strongly. Okay, Howard?
I think we should just remind ourselves that in the past couple of weeks we've agreed that a concubine is not at the bottom, on the bottom rung of the social ladder. Below the concubine is the zonah. It's not one and the same thing. There's no absolution in handing over a concubine.
No, absolutely. You're right, there isn't. But she's definitely on the lower rung of the ladder than
the daughter.
She might not be on the bottom rung, but she's fairly near it, I would suggest.
She's not a volunteer for sex, generally.
That's true. That's absolutely right, and nor should she be. Okay, let's go back to the Ramban and have a look a bit further what the Ramban says. So he goes on to say this. He knew they wouldn't desire his daughter, and they refused to listen to him. But when he sent his guest concubine by herself, they stopped demanding his guest from him. They desired to save the man by giving the concubine instead. And now here is where the Ramban makes his point clear about the status of the concubine. For she was a concubine, not a married woman, and was unfaithful to him. Also, regarding that breach of morality, not all the men of the city were part of it, as it was in Sodom. We've pointed that out, of which it says all the townspeople, from young to old. Whereas in Giveah, it says, behold, people of the city, lawless people, implying that some of the people who were officials and strong men said, the masters of Giveah rose up against me. We'll see that in the next chapter. And that's why the other townspeople didn't protest against them, because these people who were gathered up against the concubine here were the knackers of the town. They were the masters. You'll see in chapter 20, verse 5, which the Ramban points us to here, it says, Ba'alei Giveah, the masters of Giveah. So it's these people, it seems, were important people. And therefore, the locals, although they didn't get involved like they did in Sodom, where all the people were there, they didn't protest either. And as we know from other places, shtika kahoda'a domya, silence is acquiescence. They didn't complain, and they didn't complain according to the Ramban, because it was the chiefs. At this point, the chiefs of all the people, oh no, that's going on something else, sorry. That's why other townspeople didn't protest against them, because it was the masters of Giveah that rose up.
It's a whitewash. Sorry, the whole thing is a whitewash.
Right, so I wondered how long it would take you, Helen.
I was waiting for Helen. I was waiting for you, Helen.
Helen, you've done very well. You held back for 30 minutes. Well done. We were waiting for it. You're absolutely right, of course. Helen is right. The Ramban here, and this is why I said at the beginning, I think I'm uncomfortable with this, but we do need to go further on because there are further things to say about this. But as we stand at the moment, the Ramban is certainly portraying the concubine as at least not as important as the man.
Johnny, there's the interesting parallel from what you just said, that no one stood up to protest. The parallel with the previous story with Pesel Micha, because no one protested about Pesel Micha, this incident immediately followed it.
Okay, so there's two things I want to say about that. What the point that David is making there is you'll remember the story of Pesel Micha, which we spent quite some time going through. We have this Avodah Zarah going on, this idol worship, and there is no protest from the rest of the Bnei Yisrael. What you don't know at this point, because you've been very good pupils and you've not read on like I told you not to, is there is going to be in the next chapter a tremendous response from the rest of Bnei Yisrael against the people of Giveah. And they are outraged by what goes on, and there is a massive protest. But what happens is, and you'll see it as we go through in detail, that nobody comes out of this looking very good. The people that protest lose many, many people in the ensuing civil war, as does the tribe of Binyamin. And one of the things that that is pointed out is that the people did not protest when God's honor, as it were, was trampled upon in Pesel Micha and Avodah Zarah was going on, and yet they protested tremendously when the honor of a concubine was trampled upon, and the contrast between those two things is very stark. And as David pointed out, one thing often leads to the other. If we don't have the correct attitudes to certain parts of our behavior, then that can lead to certain other parts of our behavior which are extremely reprehensible. And we'll come to that in more detail when we get to the civil war in the next couple of chapters. So there's the Ramban. Now he goes further. You need to know at this point a little bit of what goes on in the future, because otherwise we won't understand this Ramban. So I'll just briefly tell you in outline what goes on in the next couple of chapters, and that is that the rest of Bnei Israel get to hear about this whole episode, and we'll see how they get to hear about it in detail. But they get to hear about it, and they are outraged. And what happens is something absolutely unique in the period of the Shoftim, and that is that the whole of Bnei Yisrael come together as one and attack the tribe of Binyamin. They ask the tribe of Binyamin to hand over the perpetrators of this evil act, the rapists. Binyamin refuses to do so, and the Bnei Yisrael, the rest of Bnei Yisrael, attack the tribe of Binyamin, and we have a civil war. So that's the outline. We're going to go into it in detail when we actually look at the Psukim. That's the outline of what happens. On that background, let's carry on in the Ramban here on Bereshit. So he says, at this point, the chiefs of all the people, of all the tribes of Israel, wanted to build a great fence, extra precautions over the affair, to put the suspects to death. Now, what does that mean? They wanted to build a great fence, extra precautions over the affair, to put the suspects to death. What do you think that means? Any offers? What's he talking about there?
Wants to put capital punishment. He wants to have them executed.
Yes. Why does he want to have them executed?
Impale them on the fence. To impale them on the fence.
Why? Why does he want to have them executed?
Wants to draw a line under it.
He wants to show the rest of the people this is what should happen.
Right.
People who
Okay.
behave like that.
All right. He wants to make an example of them. That's right. But it's interesting. He says here, at this point, the chiefs of all the people of all the tribes of Israel wanted to build a great fence and take extra precautions over the affair to put the suspects to death. Now, why doesn't he say the people of Israel, the chiefs of the tribes of Israel, wanted to put these people to death as they deserve to be killed? They are worthy of the death penalty. He doesn't say that. He talks about building a fence. Now, you'll be familiar with that expression. You'll be familiar with the concept of Torah law and rabbinic law. Torah law says that you cut, for example, Torah law says that on Shabbat there are 39 av malachot. There are 39 major categories of work which you cannot do, right? And then we have a whole bunch of rabbinic laws which are designed to be exactly this expression, a fence around the Torah. So we've described it many times before in this forum, in our shiurim. It's like the yellow line on the platform of the train station. You're not to go beyond the yellow line because it's dangerous. You might fall off the edge of the platform and get hurt. The Torah law is jumping off the platform. The rabbinic law is the yellow line behind which it's safe to stand. Actually, it's perfectly safe to stand in front of the yellow line, but not right at the edge. But the rabbis made a fence around the Torah and brought in rabbinic law in order that we wouldn't come near to violating the Torah law. So, for example, the halachot of muktzah. You'll all be familiar that you're not allowed to move certain items on Shabbat. Let's take an example of a pen. You're not allowed to move a pen on Shabbat. By the way, it's not touch a pen, it's move a pen. You're not allowed to move a pen. That's something, pen is muktzah. Okay, muktzah is a rabbinic law. And why is it you're not allowed to move a pen? Because the rabbis say, if you see a pen and you decide you want to move it because you don't like where it is, while you're moving it, you might come to write with it. And writing is a Torah law. You're not allowed to write on Shabbat. So they make a fence around the writing law and say you're not allowed to move the pen. Now that's the concept of making a fence around the Torah. The fact that the Ramban says here that the men of Israel wanted to make a fence around the affair is an indication that the Ramban is telling us that according to Torah law, these perpetrators were not guilty of a capital crime. According to Torah law, they should not be put to death. But these men of Israel wanted to put a fence around this and to implement, the death penalty, even though according to Torah law they were not actually due the death penalty. Let's carry on in the Ramban and you'll see it's clear. Here, where are we?
Wait, Johnny.
Yes, go ahead.
Can you hear me? I want to
Yes.
say something. So this whole thing is sort of like what the chumras are all about, being machmir, as opposed to, like, you know, just a few parshas ago it said don't add to the law and don't take away from the law. And chumras are all about this extra fence of, God forbid you should stand on the yellow line. Okay, so you have to stand behind the yellow line so that, God forbid, you should, you know, you should be close to when the train comes. It's it's against what it said in the Torah a couple of parshas ago. We don't add and we don't subtract.
Okay.
And it's that same thinking.
That's a whole, you're right to raise that because it is exactly that. The concept of chumrah, of adding things on, is a very fine balance. Because if you think about our analogy of the train platform, it's actually very sensible to have a yellow line a meter or so from the platform's edge, because it reminds you not to get too close. The problem, of course, comes when you put the yellow line 20 meters, 100 meters from the platform. It starts to become absurd. And that is a matter of subjectivity. And one day we can talk about the whole concept of chumrah, where chumrah is sensible and where chumrah is not sensible. And we'll all have different places where we place that yellow line. But in concept, what Faye is saying is absolutely right. But what I'm interested in here is the fact that the Ramban is clearly saying that these perpetrators, these rapists, were not deserving, halachically, according to the Torah, were not deserving of the death penalty. Let's carry on in the Ramban. They saw fit to make offense for the Torah that such things never be done or said in Israel. As they said, we will eliminate the evil from Israel. Such legal action is based on what the rabbis said. The court has the right to impose corporal punishment or capital punishment, not specified by the Torah, not to override the words of the Torah, rather to make offense for the Torah. So this is answering Faye's problem. They are actually making offense. When is offense offense? And when is offense changing the Torah? That depends on who's doing it. Now, look at what the Ramban then says. The tribe of Benjamin didn't agree to this matter because the suspects had not incurred the death penalty by violating the concubine. So again, here the Ramban is, in my humble opinion, maybe people will disagree, in my opinion, the Ramban is downplaying the events of the rape of the concubine by saying it wasn't that bad, they didn't incur the death penalty. It's also possible, says the Ramban, that the people of Benjamin were upset because the other tribes didn't send word to them first, but came to an agreement without their knowledge. In my opinion, says the Ramban, this is the reason for the punishment of Israel, why they were initially struck down, because the war wasn't undertaken legally. An offense itself was the responsibility of the tribe of Benjamin to make, not theirs. So the Ramban is saying that the reason that this civil war went badly for both sides is that both sides were at fault. And he's saying that one of the faults of the tribes of Israel in their crusade, for want of a better word, against the tribe of Binyamin is that they didn't consult with Binyamin. And actually, he's saying it was none of their business. They shouldn't have interfered. This was an internal problem of Binyamin. And to me, maybe you disagree, but to me, the Ramban is downplaying this whole story. And I don't think that Tanakh has brought us this story for it to be downplayed. I have no doubt that in the 250 to 300 years of the period of the judges, that there were many, many horrific stories of bad behavior of people. The Navi has chosen to highlight two very nasty stories, two very fundamental stories at the end of Sefer Shoftim, which, as we know, are out of chronological order and are here to bookend Sefer Shoftim. And the two stories are Avodah Zarah and shocking immorality. And I think that the Navi has brought these two stories to show us that lawlessness, and remember the Navi keeps on saying to us, Ein Melech B'Yisrael, there was no king in Israel, the men did whatever they wanted to do, they did whatever was upright in their own eyes, there was anarchy. And I believe that the Navi, Shmuel, who wrote Shoftim, is telling us very clearly that this is what was going on. And he highlights these two stories because these are the worst stories that he can think of. Because why, if you're trying to make a point, you're going to bring the strongest point you possibly can. And therefore, whilst I accept the Ramban's dissection of the story, may be technically correct, I don't think that's an interpretation to downplay the story. I don't think that's what the Navi had in mind. My interpretation is that the Navi has brought these stories because they are absolutely shocking, and we should be shocked by them, and we should not be looking to downplay them. That's my view. I'm interested in your views. Howard?
Well, the man himself, nobody suggests that he should have offered himself instead of the women. I mean, everybody comes out of this extremely badly. He should have said, take me, my life's nearly over. These are young people. I'll volunteer myself, leave the young alone.
Okay, now that's an interesting point, because it was what I was going to say, and then I got sidetracked. What I was going to say is that I would suggest to you that if, God forbid, any of us were in a scenario where we were threatened with mortal danger, and we had with us family members, be it children, be it wives, be it less strong people than us, I would suggest to you that we would be protective of our women folk and our children and our relatives. I would suggest to you that the behavior of this man who says, take my daughter but don't take me, is entirely counterintuitive to what we would do in that scenario. We would protect our children, we would protect our wife. Okay, this woman is a pilegesh, but we've already said that this man has some kind of relationship with this woman, some kind of feelings for this woman. He schlepped all the way from Har Ephraim to Beit Lechem to get her back. He spent 5 days shikering there with her father. There's obviously some relationship there with her. He's described as her husband. So I'm not buying the fact that she is, inverted commas, a mere concubine. This is his wife, and he's offering his wife, and the host is offering his daughter. This is behavior which I would suggest to you is the opposite of what a chivalrous man would do.
But
now
Johnny,
maybe one second. Maybe the ladies think that I'm being a bit chauvinistic here to say that, and that that would be wrong of me. But I think that would be the natural feeling of people, be it men or women, to protect those around them rather than sacrifice those around them. Before I come to you, Hilary, Stanley's had his hand up for a little while. Stanley first. Yes, Stanley.
Okay, I want to say that's why it's always emphasized that Torah and everything what we read, it's pertinent to the time. And if you're gonna look why it's the story brought, but if you're gonna look of position of women at that time, that's why it was punishment. That's why it's a story brought to the life, because that was a
Johnny.
Hello.
So what you're saying, I'm not quite understanding what you're saying, Stanley. Are you saying that kind of behavior was expected at that time?
Not expected. This behavior was condemned, but it still was behavior at this man and the role of women at that time. Okay,
Okay.
That's why it was punishment.
Are you saying that the Torah is pointing it out so that we accept that behavior was wrong, even though it was commonplace?
No, Torah points this out is to tell us that behavior like that is unacceptable.
Right. Okay.
But Johnny, please, can I just say, I think Nechama's question was a brilliant one about the lad. Yes. I agree with you 100%. You're not male chauvinistic. That yes, in our world, that's how we would behave. Yes, I understand what Stanley is saying about in that time women were thought of as less. But if it was the lad that had been abused, they would not have, all the tribes would not have united in the same way. They would not have come together. They would not have been so outraged, because it would have been normal practice for men to be abused like that. And I think that it shows that it was important. They should have come together in the first place to defeat the Canaanites in the first place. They didn't. It brought them together as tribes. It united them. And I think that the fact of what they'd done, the fact that she was a concubine, it meant her life wasn't worth nothing in the end, wasn't worth anything. It was her value, if you like, that brought all these people together.
Okay. Anybody like to comment on Hillary's comment before I do? Yes, Morris.
In those days, morality concepts were much different than, but you know what? They're not that much different. If you take example of all the rapes that occur in countries like India, on the buses, on the streets, on the whatever, you know, and it's gang rapes of large groups of men and one poor unfortunate girl, you know. But getting back to this, a lot of concepts were accepted in those days that aren't now. Like, for instance, homosexuality in countries like ancient Greece was not only condoned, it was very much accepted. And maybe that was accepted in that part of the world too, and the land of Israel, you know, Canaan, whatever you want to call it.
Okay. Yes, Philip.
You see, this happened what, about 2,500 years ago? But you see that the world hasn't changed. We're having cases like this today in Israel. The case of the 30 rapists in Eilat. Only about.
But rape is rape.
Some of them are going to go to jail.
Yeah.
The rest of them will go free, like, and they'll go on. It's the world hasn't changed at all.
Okay, so your point
is a great pity.
But they're only rape. They don't die from it. They don't take a life from it.
Well,
okay. Let me just.
They've taken her life. 30 rapists. They've taken her life.
I agree. They take her soul. They destroy her for life. This is something that will never go away.
Of course.
Okay. Let me just pick up on a couple of things that Hillary said. Hillary said that if they had given the lad out, that the tribes wouldn't have come together and wouldn't have been so outraged. What's amazing, actually, is that they were so outraged. Why were they so outraged? If what we are all saying, and that is that rape of concubines didn't mean anything, so what was the big deal? If that's true, if that's how they felt, how was it that the whole of the Bnei Israel And as Hilary pointed out, they hadn't come together to conquer the land. They hadn't come together to protest Pesel Micha. And suddenly, inverted commas here, one lousy little concubine is raped to death, and there's uproar. How come? Now, I think that that's an important point. I think that's an important point. And I think that if we stop and think about this for a minute, on the one hand, we are right to view these people as thinking of the concubine's life as not worth anything. Here, don't rape my guest, but have the concubine. But on the other hand, the whole of the people, the whole of Bnei Yisrael, were outraged by that. It reminds me of a story that I heard about the concentration camps. There's a famous story. Some of you may know, have heard the story. Some of you may know the origin of it. I've forgotten the origin of it. The story goes something like this: that there was a guy who had some tefillin in one of the camps, and he was the only guy that had tefillin, and he would, as it were, sell the use of his tefillin for a share of the person's bread ration. So somebody wanted to use the tefillin, had to give him half his bread ration so he could use the tefillin. And somebody said, that's absolutely terrible. You know, what kind of a person would sell the use of his tefillin and make this person give up half their ration of nothing in order to use the tefillin? And if that's the way people behave with tefillin, then I'm not interested. I don't want to be Jewish. I don't want to be frum. Don't want to put on tefillin. Not interested. And the answer was, wait a minute. Look at it from the other side. What about all those people? What about all those tens or hundreds of people who were willing to sacrifice half of their bread ration in order to put on tefillin? Why don't you look at that side of things and don't look at the negative? Look at the positive side of things. And I think that's an important point that we mustn't lose sight of here. That this outrage, which we agree was an outrage, seems to have been agreed as an outrage by Bnei Yisrael. And all the things that you have all said, which is, well, rape was no big deal in those days and she was only a concubine and all those kind of things, that actually makes the response of the Bnei Yisrael actually quite remarkable. Now, we may have to discuss, we'll come to you in a sec, Helen, we may have to discuss whether they had other motives as well for coming together against Binyamin, but at least on the face of it, what they seem to be coming together against is this outrage of something that will be done to a woman to be raped to death in that manner. So I think that's just something that we need to stop and consider the response of Bnei Yisrael to that. Yes, Helen?
Could it have something to do with the fact that it went against all the code of hospitality? You know, when somebody is a guest in your house or in your town, you have that code of hospitality, and it was known throughout the country. And if that is broken, then all the people travelling all over the country, how are any of them going to consider that they're safe?
Yeah, I mean, that's probably an element of it, for sure. We've spoken about this before, you know, that part of the world, even today, you know, if you go into Arab households, the hospitality is tremendous. You might get stabbed in the back once you step outside, but once you're in their house, the hospitality is first class. That may well be an element of the thinking behind it, for sure. Michael Krauss.
Yeah, wasn't the outrage more to do with the fact that he sent the body in 12 pieces to the 12 tribes rather than anything else?
No, I don't think so, because that was the Facebook post. That was how he got the word out to the whole of Bnei Yisrael.
And we haven't got there yet. We
haven't got there yet, but what you'll see, since you've now spoiled the story, Michael, what we'll see is that the guy sends word out with a piece of the body and does a shocking thing. But the Bnei Israel are not shocked that he sent the body out. They rise up against the perpetrators of the rape. What he did, and we're going to go into this in some detail, what he did by sending the body parts out was a piece of master marketing from 3,000, more than 3,300 years ago. No, 3,000 years ago, probably something like that.
John,
yes, Nachum.
John, I have a couple parts to this. First of all, is there a death penalty for rape in the Torah?
Exactly.
Okay. All right.
Now, secondly, we have another. We have an example. We have an example of Dinah being raped, and we respond to that rape as a people. We end up killing, murdering a whole community of people that did that. So there seems to be some kind of issue here that God did not give this authority, but we have assumed to do this in the case of rape. And the case of homosexuality is well defined as being an abomination. So if we ever had any reason to deal with the issue of sexuality and the opposite behaviors, certainly homosexuality has a greater impact on the Torah than rape, unless you can tell me where it says in the Torah you're not allowed to do that.
Okay. Now, where's David Marks gone? There he is.
Yeah, it's this week's parsha. I'm just looking it up.
All right.
Okay.
So,
Johnny.
David, talk to us about the Torah's approach to rape in this coming week's Central Day.
Okay. Johnny, your text of the Ramban is missing a vital paragraph. And one of the things he discusses there is whether the perpetrators of this terrible thing would have been liable for the death penalty according to Torah law. According to Torah law, he's suggesting that first-degree murder wouldn't have stood up. And that's why they were looking to make a sayag la Torah. Okay? So to bring in a rabbinic ruling to allow for the death penalty in this particular case. Secondly, we know that there are the three cardinal things that we give up our lives for rather than be subjected to these things. One of them, of course, is immorality. Now, here's the point from, I think it's this week's parsha, that the only person that would be liable for the death penalty where there's rape involved is where she is a betula, where she's a virgin. And this particular case, the Pilegesh is obviously not only not a virgin, but according to strict Torah law, she would not have to commit suicide or be killed rather than giving herself up in immorality because she is, in inverted commas, only a Pilegesh. And that's why the rabbinic law was implemented here in order to protect these particular cases.
Right, okay. So that what we need to put into context here, I mean, that's clear from the Ramban, that the Ramban believes that this act did not warrant the death penalty. He says that very clearly. And what's also interesting, for me, what's very interesting, is that the Bnei Israel are not having that. They're saying, no, these people need to be put to death. And in effect, what these people are doing is no different to what the rabbis have done over the centuries and painted a yellow line across the platform. And here we see that the answer to your question, Nachum, is that no, rape of a pilegesh is not a capital offense. What's interesting is that the Bnei Israel think it should be, and take, as it were, the law into their own hands and decide that they are going to enact this. Now, the Ramban excuses their behavior by pointing this out, and he says, the tribes of Israel saw fit to make offense for the Torah, that such things never be done or said in Israel, as they said, we will eliminate the evil from Israel. Such legal action is based on what the rabbis said, that the court has the right to impose corporal punishment or capital punishment, not specified by Torah, not to override the words of the Torah, but rather to make offense for the Torah. I think that's a very, very fine distinction and a difficult distinction. But that is clearly what the Ramban is saying. Okay, we've gone way over time as usual. Go on, David.
Yeah, the psukim that you're looking for would be Devarim chapter 22, verses 25 to 27.
Let's just have a quick look at those before we finish. Chapter 22. Let's have a look. Devarim chapter 22, what verses?
25 to 27.
Okay, let's have a quick look at those. Let's read it out in the English. If the man shall find a betrothed young woman in the field, and the man seized her and lay with her, the man who lay with her shall die alone. But to the young woman who shall do nothing, as a young woman has no sin worthy of death, and just like a man rises against his neighbor and murders him, so is this matter. For he, the rapist, found her in the field, the betrothed young woman. Betrothed means that she's betrothed, but she's a virgin. Young woman presumably cried out, and there is no rescuer for her. In our case, clearly, she's not going to be guilty of the death penalty, because even if she called out, nobody's there to help her, because we know that the whole lot of them, they're gang raping her. If a man feels okay, so those are the psukim, right? Okay, Anita, before we go, last one before we go, Anita.
I just want to say, nobody's critical of the man, of the two men, for throwing her out in the first place. They knew exactly what was going to happen to her. Nobody's criticizing them, saying, you know, they were wrong. He knew exactly what was going to happen. And Nebuch, when in the morning, when she's lying on the step, he says, get up, come on, let's go. You know.
Right. I mean, we're critical of him. We've said that goes against what we should be doing. We should be protecting our women folk and children, not offering them up to rapists, for sure. But yeah, it's interesting that the Ramban doesn't actually mention
nothing.
The Levi. And what's also interesting, since you point it out, is that the Levi is outraged. So outraged that he sends her body parts through the town, through the country, and in effect gets the rebellion up. But as you say, nobody addresses his version, you know, his part in this whole thing. He was the one that shoved her out the door. Mm-hmm. Yes, Marcel.
Remember, I sent you a couple of weeks ago illustrations of this thing.
Yes.
I sent you illustrations.
Yes, you did. Let me see if I can find that. Hang on a second. Let me see if I can just find the illustrations that Marcel sent. Where are we? Hang on a sec. I shall find it. There we go. Right, let me show you the screen now. Can you see that picture, everyone? No, you can't see the picture. Why can't you see the picture? How about now?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So it's a picture of the man. Here's our Levi with his arm up. His donkey is over here, and the dead woman is strapped to the donkey, and he's there. And the pasuk here says, "V'yikachea al chamor." He took her on the donkey, and the man got up and went to his place. And then there's another one over here, which I'll show you. There we go. There you can see it. There she is at the door, on the door threshold, having managed to crawl her way back after being raped all night. And there she is. She's collapsed on the door, the threshold of the door. So where were those from, Marcel?
On that same illustrated book that I showed you previously with Shibshan.
Right. And the name of the artist looks like G. Dole or Doze or something like that. Can't really. Oh, Pisan. There it is in the corner. Yeah, Pisan. H. Pisan, whoever that is. And there we are. Okay. Thank you for that. Right. We'll call it a day there. I'm going to stop recording now, and we'll carry on this sorry tale next week.